Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 518. I played e4, and my opponent played c5, and we get a dragon. After knight f3, we get what's called the hyper-accelerated dragon. I'm not making that name up, although I don't know if it's the official name. Let's see, this was a short game, so we have time to explore the opening a little bit. Let's talk about the normal accelerated dragon. So normally, if you want to play the accelerated dragon, you come out with knight c6 next. You avoid the d6 move. The idea with the accelerated dragon is to try and get this move d7 to d5 all in one move. So you delay that and play knight c6 instead, which can introduce many variations. Of course, this can also introduce the Sveshnikov. And now when white plays d4, the normal break, notice the knight is guarding that pawn, so the queen is not taking back, but the knight takes back. And now g6. This is a typical accelerated dragon. And I could play, like in the game, I could play c4 and go for the Maraxi bind setup. And we transpose into this position. But with the hyper-accelerated dragon, he's playing g6 right on the second move. And this allows other possibilities. So I go with d4, he takes, and now I just took back with the knight, and then we transpose into a normal accelerated dragon. But there is this really funny line here where I could take with the queen, and it looks good at first. In fact, probably is good for white, but it's a bit of a tricky line, hitting the rook in the corner. So that forces the move knight f6. Of course, he probably wants to play knight f6 anyway, so not a big concession. But you can continue to stir up trouble with this move e5, kicking the knight away and preparing to push this pawn forward again with some kind of double attack, perhaps. So the knight goes to c6. The knight doesn't move, but counterattacks the queen and tries to round up the pawn. Queen goes to a4. Funny sequence. And now this knight moves, and it can go to d5. And, well, play continues from here. The queen moves again back to e4. But anyway, just a funny sequence. And apparently playable for black. If you look at the evaluation, it's sort of dropped down into the playable range where black is close to equalizing. So that's the one of the lines that's sort of unique to the hyper-accelerated dragon, this early g6. You can actually take that pawn and get away with it, although your queen does get kicked around. Anyway, I just went with knight takes d4. And after knight c6, c4, we've just transposed into an ordinary accelerated dragon. So he goes bishop g7, and I go bishop to e3. These are all normal moves. Knight f6, and knight to c3. And now he plays the very rare move, queen a5. There's two main ways of continuing. One is just a castle, leading to a normal game. And the other one is to play this tricky move, knight to g4. So while we're exploring the opening, let's take a look at this funny tactic. So knight to g4, the knight is just hanging there, right? And there's nothing protecting it, and the queen's attacking it. But the queen's doing two jobs. The queen is also defending the knight here. So the way it normally goes is you take the knight, he takes the knight, and then actually the best move for white here is just to take the queen back to d1, because it immediately puts pressure on this knight and forces it to move again. Let's see, knight to e6, trying to make some sense of this knight deployment. And, well, there's a position you can play. You just have to remember to get that queen back to d1 and chase the knight away. And it's an okay position. If we back up a little bit, you might try after knight g4, you might think, isn't there some kind of tactic here? For example, if you could get rid of this knight with tempo, this knight would still be hanging. So you could try this knight takes c6 move, hitting the queen. But unfortunately, this doesn't seem to work out. He's got knight takes e3, taking the bishop and hitting your queen. So it's kind of punch and counterpunch. And black comes out okay. Let's see, if you just try to move the queen away, he will take the knight. Let's try something like queen c1. He can take on g2 with check. The the knight escapes with a kamikaze, and that's how black ends up better in that line. So your best move is to take the queen here. If you ever wander into this situation, he takes your queen, and then you take the knight. He takes the knight. The queens are off. The material is even, but well, black has at least equalized and maybe is a little better with the bishop pair. So anyway, funny ways to play in the opening. That is, so that's knight g4. So the thing is, you're probably better off not trying any tricks, not trying to win that knight, but just taking it, giving up your own knight, and then retreating back to d1, and you're okay there. And then the other line is castles. My opponent played queen to a5. So we're just out of the opening book here. I go f3, a typical kind of response. You want to keep the knight out of g4 if you can to protect the bishop. There may still be some tactic here because this knight is still a bit loose, but the situation has changed a bit. Yeah, it's just out of curiosity. Let's try this. I mean, it seems like this is an attack on the knight. Oh, no. What's different now is I can take with the pawn and keep my knight protected. That's why it no longer works. So this f3 really does keep the knight out of the g4 square. So he castled. I drop my bishop back to e2. Cancel that. I developed my other bishop to e2. Okay. Just keeping on developing. And then he played queen c7. So black is just making too many queen moves here, and he should continue probably with d6. At some point you have to give up on this whole accelerated dragon idea, because I've got the two pawns up here. He's not going to get this move d5 in. So d6 is a logical move. The engine wants to play knight to h5, which is also good, looking at these dark squares. So, but queen c7, moving the queen second time for no particular reason. I just castle. He goes knight e5. And now it looks like pushing on with c5 or f4 would give me an advantage. F4 is funny because I thought he could just take the pawn there. Let's check this out. f4, knight takes c4, bishop to f2, just getting the bishop out of the way. So just sacking a pawn, huh? Is there some kind of threat here? What if he just plays d6 here? Knight c to b5. Okay, looks like activity against his exposed queen is the plan here. And how about if he plays a6 to stop that? Then rook to c1, taking a look at the queen. So it's an interesting pawn sack. It looks like, according to the chess engine, this is really good for white. But, well, it's not so obvious. But black did waste some time with the queen, so there's kind of pawn sacks become possible. Anyway, I just defended the pawn here. And he played a6, keeping my knight out of the b5 square. Go rook to c1. Once again, f4 might have been a good move. And then his queen goes back to a5. So that's the third move with the queen, and it ended up on a square where it started from. I went queen d2, which sets up this typical kind of tactic. Let's see, I could play f4 once again for the strongest advantage. And f4 is a serious consideration there because the knight, can't grab any pawns over here on the queen side. It'd have to get pushed back. He plays d6. And now I play this knight d5 tactic, a very typical kind of move that you get in the mini dragons. Whenever the queen is played out here, which can happen in the normal dragon as well as the accelerated dragon. The idea with knight d5 is that you're threatening the pawn on e7, which goes with check. So normally the way this would go is I would play the knight here. He could take the queen, and then instead of taking the queen back right away, I take here with check. And it's important that nothing can attack this knight here, that the king can't attack the knight. One of the defenses to this tactic is to move the rook out of the way a move or two earlier so the king can play king to f8 and attack the knight. But the king is forced to h8. The knight's going to have a retreat square, and now you can grab the queen. So a very typical kind of tactic, and something you should always be looking for with the queen on a5 and with this control you have over the d5 square. So that's the idea. So I played knight d5, And instead of doing something, the best move here is actually to retreat the queen. The queen just drops back to d8, defends the pawn, and that's a fourth move for the queen. So I've gained something in terms of an edge of development, but he did notice his queen was loose over there. He took the knight, I took the queen, and he resigned. So short game, but well, some interesting sidelines in the opening there. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave any comments you have in the section below, and I will see you again soon. Bye.